Now, we have looked at a number of things over the past couple of chapters. We've looked at the way the United States has changed industrially. We have looked at the way it has changed technologically. We've looked at the changes just in education and things along those lines. And all of these changes have led to an overall change in American culture. In fact, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, we're going to see the dawn of what is referred to as a mass culture. Now, a mass culture is what you and I experience today. Mass culture is all of the various things that we enjoy as a society. Now, that could be movies, television, sports, I mean, you name it. All of these things rolled together form the culture that you and I know today. And really, you can look back to about 1900 or so, and you can really see the birth of this mass culture. I mean, there's a lot of things that have changed over the course of time. Okay, there are a lot of differences in form and what have you, but really the basic tenets of this new culture really could be found there. Seeing the different things that people wanted to do with their free time in particular. All of these things are a direct result of all the changes that we've been talking about, and now we're going to get a little look at how that mass culture now came into existence. And to start things out, we're going to talk about American leisure. Now, we are a society that likes our free time. We love the ability to basically do what we want when we want. Those of you who have jobs, you understand that when you're on the clock, there are different things you have to do. But then once your time is your own, you can relax. It's the same thing with school. There are different rules, there are different things that apply to when you're actually going to school, different things you have to do. But then once you're done, once you get finished for the day, if we were physically in class, once you're home, then you have that opportunity to relax. And everybody seems to enjoy the weekend. It has become a staple of the American psyche that the weekends are going to be a time when you can relax. And in all honesty, we owe a lot of that leisure time to machines. Okay, the machines that were invented in the late 1800s really allowed workers to do their job faster. And think about the way we're using those types of machines today. Vehicles allow us to move things more quickly, computers allow us to record information more swiftly. All of the different aspects of life that we take for granted today really came about because of inventions. Look at, for example, just agriculture. For a long period of time in human history, it was vitally important that a huge proportion of time was spent on crops because otherwise you're looking at starvation. Now, because of the changes in mechanics, you have the ability to grow more food with fewer people. Okay, we are able to do much more than previously in a much shorter time because we are leveraging our technology. We are going through and using those machines to allow us to get our jobs done faster. And because we are able to get our work done more quickly, it takes us less time to accomplish a particular task. This means that you and I have a shorter work week. You have more leisure time. It used to be that you worked from sunup to sundown at least 6 days a week. Now we don't worry about that as much. Now a full-time job is essentially looked at as 8 hours per day, 5 days a week, 40 hours out of the week, and the rest is your time. So with these machines, we have a shorter work week. Because we have a shorter work week, we have more time to do things. You think about it. A full time job, like I said, you work 8 hours a day. After that, you have 16 hours with which to do what you please. Generally speaking, people would use about 8 hours for sleep, and then you have 8 hours to just do whatever. And that doesn't even include the weekends. Now, we talked about weekends a moment ago. It is the fact that on the weekend, you can plan to go do other things. So, because of these machines, and we now have the shorter week, we have the ability to have more leisure. And what do we do with that leisure? How do we use that time? Well, one of the things that became very popular around the turn of the century and remains so to this very day is the amusement park. Now, many of us have been to a variety of amusement parks. We have in this general area, you have things like Great America. You can drive south to places like Magic Mountain or Disneyland, or you can go to other parts of the country and go to Disney World. There are a number of different amusement parks scattered throughout not just California, but throughout the entire nation. And a lot of city dwellers at this point in time really enjoyed a trip to the amusement park. It was the ability, and it still is today, that you can get out of wherever you live, whatever you're doing on a regular basis, and you go to this park and you just have fun. It is legitimately an escape from reality. You don't have to worry about the bills you have to pay or about work coming up on Monday. You have that moment to just enjoy the time. And this is a point in time where you're starting to again see the use of mechanical ingenuity to create more and more thrill rides. This is really starting to become a big industry at that point. Rides like the roller coaster. I mean, we take roller coasters for granted. We don't think much about them. But think about how new that would have been at the turn of the century. Think about the way in which you could quite literally feel like you were about to be flung off into space as it's going through its, various curves and dips and dives. And yet you kept going back for more. Same thing with the Ferris wheel. The Ferris wheel, you're up at a pretty good height depending on the wheel itself, and you can see a great distance. So you had things like this. You had the rides, which were thrilling people. People would pay good money to go to these parks to feel like they were close to danger, but for the most part, not get hurt. Now, granted, of course, there's always going to be accidents, but generally speaking, those are still to this day the exception rather than the rule. So, roller coasters, Ferris wheels, other rides like that, things that would make people become, very lightheaded, shall we say, as they're going through on the excitement. They have to this day in places like Las Vegas, on top of one of the buildings, the Stratosphere, they have a roller coaster at the top of a high-rise building. And, people line up and pay good money to this very day to go through and do that. But it wasn't just amusement parks. You also had people start going through and become fascinated with various aspects of exercise, okay? In particular, bicycling and tennis. Now, these were huge sports at the time, ladies and gentlemen. Bicycling is still very popular to this day. There's a lot of people who will still commute via bicycle. It entertained both men and women. It was the kind of sport for both. And what's more, it allowed you to get out to, ride around the city or into the countryside or anything like that. It allowed you to just enjoy the time that you had. And what's more, you're getting some exercise, some fresh air. So there are a multitude of benefits in regards to this. Plus, a big rage at the time, tennis. Tennis is still a huge money-making operation when we watch professional tennis. So again, people are getting outside. They are exercising. This is benefiting both their health, their body, and their mental state, because they're doing something they enjoy. They are out and about, and they are able to go through and have a good time. And again, if you're out on a bicycling ride or if you're going through and you're playing a game of tennis, you're not thinking about work at that point in time. You're not focused on school or something like that. You're going through and you're just enjoying life at that moment. And that's what part of this American leisure was all about. Plus, you had all sorts of new foods becoming popular, things like Hershey's chocolate. Now, we take a Hershey's chocolate bar for granted today. It is, everywhere, and just about everybody on the planet has had a Hershey's bar at some point or another. But you had things like that which were now readily available. Once upon a time, sweets and candies like that were really only for the wealthy. Now it was possible for every person to enjoy a candy bar. And the Hershey Company turned them out by the millions. You also had things like Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola was there. It was the energy drink of the day. It was, even at one point in time, did include some cocaine in it, believe it or not. And it was done as a quote-unquote pick-me-up. It was no different, really, at that point in time than, like, say, the Monster or Bang or any of the energy drinks of today would be. Some people thoroughly enjoyed it. Some people don't. Same thing to this day. Some people do and don't like sodas. I personally enjoy sodas, but it is to each their own. But these are just some of the different changes that had been coming. You had all sorts of things: amusement parks, exercise, foods. American leisure life was really starting to move forward. And you could see from the bicycling and tennis that people were really starting to get into the concept of sports. And that was only going to continue to improve and keep changing as time went forward. While the American people came to truly enjoy getting out and participating in sports, another aspect of sports really came into its own with the late 1800s, early 1900s, and that was the concept of spectator sports. Okay, sporting events which people could go, they could watch, they could cheer on their team or their particular player, they could enjoy themselves and live vicariously through the players on the field or whatever was going on. For example, boxing, that became incredibly popular in the late 1800s. Now, people to this day, boxing matches are a huge money-making investment. You look at the extension of this would be things like, MMA, UFC, stuff like that, the various fights that people will gladly, drop a chunk of money to watch on pay-per-view. So boxing started to really become popular in the late 1800s. And by the turn of the century, it was a profitable business. People knew that they could now make money off of boxing. We're not just talking about the boxers themselves, but we're talking about the promoters, we're talking about the people who put on the shows, we're talking about, every level. And this became a business. And it's been a business that has now made money for over a century. Boxing matches, UFC fights, any of these things like that, they still are making a big chunk of money. You could throw into that even things like, professional wrestling. You could tie that in. So you're looking at boxing, for example, was of huge interest at the time and has grown since. But there was one sport in particular that really came into its own at this time and is still a huge aspect of American life today. And that would be none other than baseball. Now, baseball has been played for about 2 centuries now. Different forms of it going back to the early 1800s. There are those who argue it's an American version of the English game cricket or the English game rounders, but it's really sort of an American anomaly in and of itself. In the late 1800s, especially from about the Civil War on, you saw a dramatic increase in how much people enjoyed baseball and how much people were willing to start to spend to go watch. Now, at the outset, all the teams were essentially, non-professional. They were amateur leagues and people just went and watched. It wasn't until later on that we started to professionalize the game. Now, 2 of the leagues which still exist to this very day would be the National League, which was formed back in 1876, and then about 25 years later, you had the American League formed in 1901. Now, there were some other leagues that happened from time to time, they came and went, stuff like that, but these are the 2 that have really stayed. And the more people watched the game, the more people wanted to watch the game, it seems. So they started expanding how they were playing and things like that. They had, actually set rules and what have you, and they really, normalized all the playing of it. And people loved it. And it really became the national pastime. It was a sport that was truly loved by a huge proportion of the American people. Now, at first, early on, there were African American players that were also able to play. Unfortunately, that didn't last very long. African Americans were not allowed to play in either league for an extended period of time, even though at the outset they were. And there were a lot of good players that never really got to be seen by a lot of people because of the prejudice at the time, unfortunately. What it was is that there wasn't a set rule. There wasn't anything like carved in stone or, written down or anything like that. But think back to the Gentleman's Agreement. Okay, we had the Gentleman's Agreement between Roosevelt and the government of Japan in regards to Japanese immigration. Same kind of thing is going to go on here. There's going to be a gentleman's agreement that no African American players would be allowed to play professional baseball. And so what happened? African American players formed their own leagues. Okay, they were referred to as the Negro Leagues. You had the Negro National League and the Negro American League, and these two leagues had some of the finest players that ever played the game. Individuals like Satchel Paige, for example. But unfortunately, we don't even have full records of the stats and whatnot from the Negro Leagues because they oftentimes didn't have the money to pay someone to record all the information as the game was being played. But just like the white games, these games were phenomenally popular. And so people from all races were enjoying baseball. Now, baseball is still to this very day a huge part of American culture. I will readily admit that I am a huge baseball fan. My team is the Yankees, and I will watch literally during a regular season probably 200 games all told, at least, if not more. I really enjoy baseball. But it's in this early part of the century that you see it start to come into its own. And the drawback is the gentleman's agreement forbidding African American players, that wouldn't be broken until Jackie Robinson joined the Brooklyn Dodgers. And it is, to this day, you can go see, they do have the Cooperstown, that is the Baseball Hall of Fame, but they also have in, it's either Kansas City or St. Louis, I forget which, they do have the National Museum for the Negro Leagues. And so highly recommend either or both of those. Baseball really came about at this point in time, and at least as far as I personally am concerned, you may not be a fan of baseball, but as far as I'm concerned, I am very happy that it is a part of American culture to this very day.